retail traders, potentially also pro traders, or people who build teams and their own simulations. And we're also building these models of the future that AIs can use. And this is something really important. Like, we're soon going to be seeing AI wanting to create a model of the future when it wants to de-risk a position. This is all going to happen very, very quickly, and we see synth as like this perfect engine. And for especially this last use case for like AIs trying to build a model of the future, they need a probabilistic model. And when it comes to point predictions, which is most of the current like forecasting that we see, they're fairly useless here as they don't give a full understanding, or they don't give like the probability distributions of what can happen in the future. So to kind of compare like why synth is good at predicting the future, like the distributions of the future, every day we have roughly 165 million data points submitted to synth, whereas most other point prediction subnets have around 10,000 data points. So yeah, if we skip to the next slide.
And this is because, if you don't mind me, this is because you're not predicting the absolute price. You're predicting entire path of the price over a period of time. That's what you mean by point predictions versus series.
Exactly.
Exactly. If you go to the next slide, hopefully, there we go. There is an example of these predicted paths that we're getting everyone to generate. So yeah, as James was saying, the synth subnet's a competition aimed at finding the best quants, research teams, data scientists out there to build these generative models of time series data. And the first challenge is for them to apply this to generating Monte Carlo paths of Bitcoin prices in the future, or the Bitcoin price in the future, where those paths encompass like all the nuances of real Bitcoin price data. So they encompass like volatility dynamics and volatility clustering, like heavy tails and black swan events, potential upside and downside skew in distributions. That's the aim. And the very first challenge, like phase one of this, that's been live since January, is for these miners or these teams to build models to predict on request 100 paths of the Bitcoin price stretching 24 hours into the future, with like 5-minute intervals. So each of those paths contains, I think, 289 prices, and they're predicting 100 paths for each validator request. So if we go on to the next slide, this is kind of how we've set things up to achieve this. Here's a diagram of the full architecture, but essentially what happens is each validator will send out one of these requests to all the miners, and they do that roughly every hour. They'll send out one of these requests, and the miners then have it's to run their models that they've built ahead of time. They've hopefully spent weeks or months crafting these models. The 2 minutes to run the model to generate these 100 simulated paths of the Bitcoin price, and return these to the validator. The validator stores those price paths in a database, and then 24 hours later, it looks back at those predictions and says, okay, what was the real Bitcoin price path over that time? So for every miner, it's now going to be able to judge the 100 paths that they predicted against the real path and do that across all the miners and come up with a scoring mechanism, or apply this scoring mechanism that we've designed to be able to determine whose model was the best. And this process is repeated hourly, and we found that if you do this over a sufficient number of hours, over sufficient time periods, we can indeed pick out good miners from bad miners. So hopefully some of your initial skepticism is resolved. We'll come on to this. If you go on to the next slide, here's exactly how they do the scoring for one of these prompts. So as you can see, there's the 100 paths there, so it's kind of a pretty sizable amount of data they've got to score. First thing is they just break it down into increments. So they break it down into every single 5-minute increment or interval. So in that graph in the middle, you can just see the price changes essentially predicted by one miner for the first 5-minute interval. And that kind of that's then converted there into a histogram on the right, where at the time of judging, the validator will have access to what the price change was in that 5-minute interval for BTC, what the real change was. Let's see if the Pith oracle, or actually they can use any oracle they like, but we've kind of set up the default miner or default validator to use Pith because we've got a partnership with them. So then it's a case of trying to judge for this single distribution for this interval, how well did that distribution predict this single real price point? And the way to do that is what's called using a proper scoring rule. So the maths behind these proper scoring rules, and there's quite a lot of different ones you can choose from, but essentially anything counts as a proper scoring rule as long as the miners are incentivized to predict a distribution that matches their true view of the underlying distribution, matches their kind of view of the uncertainty of the future Bitcoin price. So I think potentially where a lot of other price prediction subnets have fallen down in the past is through not using proper scoring rules. And as soon as you deviate from that kind of mathematical definition of proper scoring rules, it means there's abilities to game the system. So given that we have this proper scoring, go for it.
So can we dive into the CRPS formula itself? Because I was looking at it before. It's a fascinating formula.
Yeah. So essentially, what it does is it penalizes. So the aim is to minimize the CRPS. So the best you can do in the CRPS, which is the continuous ranked probability score, is a value of 0, which corresponds to if you had managed to predict a distribution that was completely narrow and bang on the real price. Now, the issue is you don't know the Bitcoin price change. So if you try to produce a very narrow distribution and guess what the Bitcoin price is, you get very, very heavily penalized. I think the penalty is kind of embodied in that first term there.
So you're trying to minimize this term, and
yeah, you want to minimize the entirety of that expression. So you want to ensure that your predictions. So the narrower you make your predictions, the better. But you don't want them narrow and wrong. So the ideal is to predict the kind of true underlying distribution. If such a thing exists for how the Bitcoin price is going to evolve in the future, you want to match your predictions to that distribution. So you don't want to make your predictions too narrow because you get heavily penalized. You don't want to make that because you'll inevitably get it wrong on occasion. And you don't want to make them too wide because that's cowardice in a way. So that's what the second term does there. It's the sum of all the differences, the pairwise differences of the miner's predictions. Counterintuitively, and maybe I won't go into this in too much depth, but there's a minus sign there. You would think initially it would be a plus sign because you'd be penalizing people for these different pairwise differences and the width of your distribution. Actually, what's happening is those pairwise differences are embodied in that first term in a way that grows more quickly than what is kind of mathematically a proper scoring rule. But anyway, that's kind of digressing. So essentially, you want to pick this distribution that matches the true distribution. You don't want to go too narrow. You don't want to go too wide. And ideally, you would have it centered on the true price. But understandably, that's not always possible because no one really knows what direction the price is going to move in. So apologies for saying that to all the other kind of price prediction subnets out there, but I don't think that people know the direction of price movements, really. And I think it's kind of a very difficult, if not kind of foolish direction to go in, to try and hope that people do manage to predict directionality. That's kind of not what synth is about. Synth is much more about, as I said before, predictions or modeling of volatility and volatility dynamics, and these modeling these distributions as opposed to kind of guesswork on price directions. So yeah, and then so that's just for a single interval. The validators repeat that for every single one of the intervals across the 24-hour period for those 5-minute intervals. And in addition to that, we do it for 30-minute intervals and 3-hour intervals and a full 24-hour interval as well, because we want to test kind of the long-term price dynamics in these models. It's no good just judging each 5-minute window independently, because that wouldn't test for kind of volatility clustering. You wouldn't see these periods of like a few hours where volatility is high and hence the score, hence the price diffuses rapidly for a few hours. So using those large intervals as well hopefully tests for that. So the next step then, they've judged this, they've got this CRPS sum for every miner for a given prompt. Which you can see kind of in that top left chart there. That's the process of just having summed up all the scores for those intervals. And these charts we've plotted the top miners and also the 50th place miner, which I think is in blue, and the 100th place miner, which I think is in yellow there as well, to kind of compare. So they look pretty similar on the surface, these overall CRPS sums. So what we do is look at the differences between miners. So we subtract the S score on any given prompt for across all the miners from the scores of the miners. That gives the kind of plot in the top right there, where there's still like a huge amount of noise. So you can see there's a period of time in the middle there of like a fair few hours, and the 50th best miner was beating, had this lower CRPS sum, lower prompt score, so lower prompt scores are better, had a better score across a load of prompts for a good few hours, if not the best part of a day there, than the best miners. It's no good just to reward based on individual prompt scores. Instead, we want to look for consistency in performance of these models that the miners produced. So we do this smoothing process, which is just kind of standard exponential weighted moving average based on how long ago the prompt was from. Currently, we have that set up to have about a half-life of like 3.5 days and look back over a maximum window of 7 days. So when you start to do this, you start to see the good miners emerge from the bad miners. Keep in mind the kind of vast amount of data that's gone into this. As James mentioned before, it's like 165 billion data points per day. So we're now kind of averaging those over the course of a week. So I guess that's like 1 billion data points have gone into producing these smooth scores at any point in time. Then we do this kind of comparative normalization step to get the reward weights, which is just like a softmax function with a kind of beta parameter in there that we can control when we need to determine how much to space out these miners. And there you can see these kind of differences emerging between the best miners, which have these higher reward scores, and these kind of lower down, the blue and the yellow 50th and 100th place miners. So the question is then, does it work as a subnet? And if we go to the next slide, yes, I think it turns out it does. I mean, when we were building this and coming up with this idea for a scoring mechanism, I didn't know actually if it would really work out, because I tried to do back tests, but it's difficult to do back tests with simulating 240 independent separate models. So the back tests look promising, but in reality, yeah, it seems like it's working out. So thank you, Tau Stats, for these screenshots. there's the miner rewards distribution on the top right, and it has this peasant curve that everyone's kind of looking for. Personally, I think we can make it steeper, or we can make it steeper, and we will make it steeper in future. We can adjust that beta value, which we've kind of been doing as we've been going along, and we'll continue to do. Because the subnet's kind of in its infancy for now, so we didn't want to put off people too much. We still, up to now, kind of wanted to reward people for having a go and getting involved and developing their models. But it's starting to come to the point now where I think we can make this steeper. We want to more heavily reward the best miners and, yeah, stop kind of giving away free money essentially to less good miners who aren't putting in the effort. So we'll continue to adjust that parameter over time. Please do interject with any questions as well. If you have them as we go along.
I was going to say that I think it needs to be slightly steeper. Yeah,
we can do that, and I'm keen to make it steeper because, yeah, as you can see, it's kind of a big bulk of miners there. You can see, yeah, the 50th place one is getting what, like 0.7%, and we can make it steeper. We did in the early days of the subnet make a bit of a mistake and accelerate making it steeper too quickly. You have to do it in tandem with ensuring that smoothing period is long enough to be able to kind of correctly pick out the good miners. Otherwise, you risk running into kind of a more of a lottery-based situation, which is what we've designed all this to avoid. So you can make it steeper in tandem with increasing that smoothing and that exponential moving average width. But we do, having watched the scores for the past few weeks, I think we've got plenty of room to increase the steepness of that curve, and we've got the levers we can pull to do that. In terms of, or if we go back just one second, the validators, from the validator perspective, I think it's working pretty well. You can see the distribution of scores across miners, and they kind of match up. I think of those, Roundtable 21, our own validator, the synth validator, and Rizzo are definitely doing like the correct scoring, applying the scoring mechanism. I have a feeling some of the others are actually doing weight copying, not to name any names. But the ones that are doing the scoring, they're coming up with very similar scores across all the miners, despite them actually doing like independent requests and getting back independent different data. Still, once you smooth over a long enough time period, it leads to, yeah, equivalent scores between different validators across the miners, and that's good for vtrust. As you see on the left there, I think, yeah, UID 0, 1, and 34 are doing correct scoring, and they've all got pretty good vtrust values. So I guess, yeah, if you go to the next slide, a big question as part of this is, are there truly good miners? Because, I mean, we were looking at the steepness of that curve before, and I was saying, yeah, we can change the steepness of the curve, but is it actually rewarding good miners with good models? And the real test of that is, if you look at independent time periods, do the same miners come top of the leaderboard or near the top of the leaderboard during those time periods? And here's a graph over the course of a month, looking at the performance of the best miners, and keeping in mind that the smoothing only ever looks back maximum of 1 week. So each week is kind of fully independent in a way of or any 7-day window is fully independent of the previous 7-day window. And yeah, looking at that graph, remarkably, there are good miners with good models. There are clearly miners there who do well over the course of the whole month. Looks like some of them had a bit of a blip in the middle of the month. I think that corresponded to some kind of surprisingly low levels of volatility during that time. But yeah, it's looking pretty promising, I think, from the perspective of whether we are managing to single out good quants and research teams, etc., who are producing good models. Cool. So yeah, go to the next slide. Or actually, do you have any questions on the whole scoring mechanism?
As I understand it, there's no there's a absolute score for a single miner, and it measures how close the miner's predictions were to the actual price, while subtracting the average, the spread of the distribution. So you need a small distribution that's accurate, but you can also opt for a broader distribution that's accurate, but it gets penalized for being broad, right? I'm
Exactly.
correct.
And if yeah, spot on. You can kind of go either direction, but what it turns out is this like it's the optimum thing to do is to predict what you think the underlying distribution will be. Say it was a situation where the God controlled the Bitcoin price and there was this underlying distribution that he was just picking it from. The optimum thing you could do as a miner would be to predict that same distribution. So you don't want to go too narrow and get it wrong. You don't want to go too wide, and just be kind of too cowardly about it by just hedging your bets.
So another way to say that would be like, if the generator for the Bitcoin price was geometric Brownian motion, if it was just a Gaussian distribution,
Yeah.
randomly pulled with Python's random package to go up or down. That's a nicely contained distribution described by its mean and variance. If that were the case, if it were the case that Bitcoin's price was determined by a simple distribution like Gaussian Brownian motion, the optimal score for a miner would be one which came from them just using that same random number generator. They also included.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The best thing they could do would be to use the same generator and generate their paths from that.
And that's but the stock market doesn't follow a nice Gaussian pattern. The distribution is high dimensional and long tailed, right? Telebian style long tailed. I'm not sure Poisson distributions, etc. Would it be the case? Would it be the same outcome if these distributions were like high dimensional long tailed? That the best score would be, again.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever the underlying distribution is, however kind of crazy the distribution is, the best thing you could do is to copy that generator function and have complete access to it. So the reality is there is no underlying generator function, and unless, well, yeah, I guess whatever view you have of the universe, I don't think you could argue there's like a underlying generator function. So you have to produce these models that you think best match the historic data, under the assumption that the nuances of the historic data will continue into the future.
And what is
so that's
the base? What is the base miner doing? And it's taking us from the most simple, naive approach to how a miner would create these paths, all the way to what you think very sophisticated miners are doing right now. What is that spec?
So if you go to the next slide, so as a reward to anyone who stuck with me listening to all that maths, I'm going to give away a kind of a lot of the secrets, I guess, of where the miners are at now, or at least what we can kind of see the best miners are doing. So yeah, as you said, the kind of base miner, the kind of simplest model you can do would be to have this geometric Brownian motion. Just say, okay, the price changes are normally distributed with a fixed sigma and a fixed mean. Presumably you'd probably use a mean of 0 for the price changes, and you'd look at historic data and extract what you think the typical sigma value would be, and you'd set it running with that, and that's very much the base level, and that's what we gave away as the default miner. So very quickly that default miner's ability got kind of superseded. So I think the essential things, if you want to get into the top 20 or so miners, or I don't know actually how close you'll get with this, but if you want to be up there with the best miners, you've got to realize that volatility, a lot of what synth does is, a lot of what the contest is for modeling volatility. So you could stick with this normally distributed model, but you could take your sigma value and you could vary this over time. So the first thing you'd want to do is you'd look at historic data and you'd see, oh, like the volatility during the day is much higher than the volatility at night. I think as defined by like US times. It seems from this, here's a plot of what the best miner is doing in the kind of bright yellow solid line and the dashed line. I think that's around 2 a.m. UTC. There's this drop off into nighttime volatility mode, and then this jump up again into daytime volatility level. I think as well between weekdays and weekends, there's a big differential. So I'd say that's the kind of first order improvement that people should make. Again, I hope I'm not giving away too much here from the miner's perspective, but I think it's good for everyone to kind of catch up to this stage now. There's also longer term volatility trends. As kind of everyone in crypto would realize, there are long periods where nothing interesting happens, and then everything interesting happens all at once. So the last week especially, I think, and the week before, was stuck in some like volatility doldrums. But recently it looks like it's picking up again. So you have these kind of, I don't know how long, but over the period of weeks, maybe even lasting for months, I guess many different timescales of volatility regimes. So being able to model those as well is essential. And then beyond the simple normal distribution with varying sigma value, you want to somehow put these long tails into your distribution. These fat tails, this high ketosis, I think is the statistical term, because even on short time scales, most of the time nothing much is happening. The price changes are very small, but then all of a sudden you'll get very large price changes, and that kind of exists across the whole time spectrum. And I think in fact the shorter the time scale you look at, the higher the ketosis typically of these distributions, the kind of fatter the tails become. So I'd say those are the kind of essential tips. How you embed those in this generator function is up to you as a miner. I think that gets, there's lots of different ways of doing that, and it can be quite complex, and each of those will end up with kind of slightly different nuances in the paths you produce. But yeah, that's kind of the base level I'd recommend doing now if you want to be competitive as a miner.
That's very interesting. So I understood what you were saying, Sam. Where you would start as a miner is assume that it's a Gaussian Brownian motion. You're gonna use a random number generator to generate a Brownian motion starting at the current price. But what you're going to focus on is the volatility, the sigma parameter of your random number generator. Correct? You're going to
Exactly.
change just that part. And the reason why you're going to do that is because the volatility is actually easier to predict. You said as an example, when Americans go to sleep, the volatility goes down. When they wake up, it goes up. And that's actually like a clear pattern that we can see on the image on the left. So the divot or the slump there in volatility, are those waking hours of American traders?
So the high part there on the left is the waking hours, and then I think it's over like a 48-hour window. So in fact, these are metrics we've got kind of running live from our best miners. You can go on our volatility dashboard to see this, and this is our predictions of those miners from 24 hours ago for that line on the left, looking forward into the next 24 hours, and then it's that dashed line is their predictions going forward. That's extracting the volatility from all their predicted paths. So they were initially predicting, I think like high during the day and then drop at night, and then again jump up during the day, high for the rest of the day, drop at night, and so on.
So where does this interact with long-tailed or fat-tailed distributions, where you want on a particular period of time, you want the miners to maximize their ability to match the distribution? And so they predict a Gaussian Brownian motion. But then every once in a while, there's a fat-tailed event, a black swan, as you said.
Exactly. So that's why we need to average over pretty long time scales, because these people with the just a normal distribution prediction could do well over the course of a day, over the course of 2 days, but eventually they're going to get caught out. There's going to be some tail event that they're predicting basically zero probability for, whereas the better modelers will have sat there with their long tail distributions, with I guess their long tails essentially kind of costing them a small amount for every time that the Bitcoin price doesn't have a vast price swing. And then eventually something like today will happen, where there'll be a huge price movement in one direction, and anyone who's been using the normal distribution method will be massively penalized. And comparatively, the people with the fatter tail distributions would finally be rewarded. So that's how that pans out. And I think you can see this, the bottom right graph there is a plot of the kurtosis, so which is the like fat tailness across the miners. The y-axis is the leaderboard position, or the average leaderboard position of the miners, and the x-axis is their average kurtosis. So it seems like really it's just that all of the best miners there are incorporating fat tails. So that seems essential.
That's very interesting. So it does mean that you're capturing the fat tail distribution, and the range that you're using is forcing the miners to actually have sophisticated, and also sort of like defensive, predictive models.
Exactly. Yeah. They every day that the price doesn't have a big swing in it, they'll be penalized for having those fat tails. But yeah, everything will come back around in their favor on the rare occasion that it does happen. And due to the maths of the CRPS function and the fact that it's a proper scoring rule, the rate at which those black swan events happen will be sufficient to penalize the people who didn't predict them, shift them lower down the leaderboard. Cool. So yeah, this will be quite kind of abstract for now, but I guess you can get into what the point of all this is. So if we go on to the next slide. So I guess the question then is, why Monte Carlo simulations? Why are we kind of so obsessed with producing these paths? Why not just ask people for distributions or ask people for point predictions? And the answer is because it's so much more versatile what you can do with these Monte Carlo simulations, or you can do with these the path data. You can essentially pick out any distribution or any probability you like from these paths, because we've designed the scoring system so that the paths will correctly span the probability space. So now you can ask any question. You can say, okay, what's the probability the Bitcoin price will be above $103,000 at this time tomorrow? And all you need to do to get an answer is just count the paths that are above that price. So we can, because we've got so many miners, and we've got, let's say, we take the top 10 miners and merge their paths to get a collection of 1,000 paths. You can just count how many of those 1,000 paths does the price end up above $103,000, and that's the probability. That's what the synth forecast is saying for the probability. And you can do a whole manner of things that wouldn't be possible just with single distributions. So you could ask, okay, yeah, what is the probability though that I'm going to get liquidated? So if I'm going to get liquidated if the price goes above $103,000, say I've got a short position, what is the probability I'm going to get liquidated at any stage over that time period? Now, for anyone who just if we were just getting a distribution, then they wouldn't be able to answer that question. It's path dependent. So it opens up this whole load more use cases. So hopefully on the next slide we've got a few of these use cases listed out. So what we did, we got the subnet working, we had it producing all this data, and then we were wondering, okay, what's the best way to market this, to get this data out there to as many people as possible. I think James is going to come on to this. But we decided we would give away some numbers essentially for free, because I want people to be using this and to see kind of how useful it is. So we've built out these like live metrics pages. So hopefully the links are going to be in the chat. for a few different metrics, which are hopefully useful across all manner of different areas of crypto trading. So the first one that I just touched on, one of these, like liquidation probabilities. So say you're a degen and you like to do 50x leverage trades, you will have found in the past that you're going to be getting liquidated fairly often. But now you can put a number to that. For your position, as you place it, you can, courtesy of the synth forecast, you can say, okay, what is the probability I'm going to get liquidated within the next 6 hours, within the next 12 hours, 24 hours, and we've got those numbers running live on these pages, so you can look them up yourself. The ideal is going to be when these are integrated into the platforms themselves. So hopefully, I mean, we've been in talks with a few different platforms, but one day we want these across all the centralized exchanges, all the perp dexes. So when you place a trade, you can see, okay, in the next 24 hours, I've got a 40% chance of getting liquidated. That seems too high. I wanted to go outside. I don't want to monitor my position. I'll decrease my leverage. Or more likely, you'll see, okay, it's only a 10% chance of getting liquidated. I'll just ramp up the leverage on there. I think that's probably what the perp dexes would prefer. So that's one use case. Then the next slide shows another one of our pages, which is options pricing. Because the miners are incentivized to essentially produce these, or their paths will form these correctly shaped distributions, it means that we should be able to do options pricing correctly. So we put our numbers out there. We are using the predictions from the top 10 miners to fuel our options pricing calculations, and we're pulling prices from Deribit. And yeah, you can compare those in real time to kind of see how we're doing. And remarkably, we're typically very in line with the option prices, which is kind of amazing. I was pretty happy to see that, because it's coming from this sea of like 1 billion data points per week, and we're refining that down via this whole scoring mechanism to select the best miners, and of their data points, refine that down further to just get a single number, which is like the 0 data expiry call option price at a strike price of $94,000, whatever it might be. And then it matches with the market value. It's kind of often bang on within the bid and the ask prices on Deribit, which is remarkable, because that will have taken a completely different approach. People producing those prices will have more of a top-down, kind of market-driven, wisdom of crowds approach, and yet they kind of meet in the middle. So of course, the commercial side, there's kind of 2 routes to go with this with the option pricing. One is, if it is good enough, and we are testing this at the moment, we can build options trading bots for either in-house proprietary trading or open up vaults. The other possibility is more an educational tool to kind of plug into these options platforms. Because we are predicting these full distributions, you can finally show people as they're purchasing an option what we expect the distribution to look like, and what that means for the expected their payout distribution for their option or their whole portfolio of options. And the people we've been talking to, Derive, for instance, thought this was pretty cool. So I'm kind of looking forward to either someone within the team or an external team spin up that kind of educational tool. And then another one we spun up on the next slide is for liquidity providers on concentrated AMMs. So if anyone has ever provided liquidity on these concentrated AMMs, you'll know that you're faced with a screen where you have to the range of your liquidity position, and often you're kind of blind as to what the ideal range should be, either like the kind of financially optimum or what the optimum is for kind of your situation. But now we can answer questions on that. We can say, okay, you set your range to have bounds of 2% either way around the current price. What is the probability that the price is going to remain within your range and you'll keep accruing fees the entirety of the next 24 hours? Or what is the expected time that it's going to remain within your range? And if those numbers are too low for your liking, if there's too much probability of it going outside your range and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to have to come back to my computer and and update this range and move my position. It's going to be a whole load of hassle. You can widen your range, and there's values there for impermanent loss as well, which is useful for anyone who's kind of really going down the route of trying to optimize their liquidity provision to maximize their APY. So yeah, we're in the process now, and James will comment this more, of talking to all these potential partners out there and potential protocols that we can integrate this data layer with. I think I've maybe got one more slide, and then I'll hand back to James. So I guess the question is, yeah, does it work for these metrics that we're pulling out? I mean, as I was saying, kind of qualitatively for options pricing, it's working pretty well. But here's some analysis that we've done in our team, or Davide's done. He's written a long article about this for anyone who wants to go and read it, where he is back testing these liquidation probabilities that have come out of synth versus what the rest of the industry would be using. For instance, just a basic geometric Brownian motion model. And yeah, as you'd hope, we kind of massively outperform the basic benchmark model. In that top graph, you can see our probability estimates for the chance of a 1% price movement happening in the next 6 hours, i.e. are you going to get liquidated on your highly leveraged position in the next 6 hours? And the blue line shows the frequency at which that ended up occurring. So all these predictions are kind of made like for the event, before the observation, but still it's done a very good job at matching up or predicting the observed frequency, much better than the kind of constant red line GBM model. And then the next two slides just kind of mathematically go into that and look at the improvement in log likelihood versus the GBM model, and look at how well, at the final set of graphs, how well synth forecasts model the residuals versus the GBM model. And yeah, they essentially do very, very well. So basically, we're at a good position now that we've built something that seems to work and provably works. We've got good miners, and now we're coming up to the next step, which is, yeah, how do we commercialize this, which I think James will talk about now. Or
Thanks.
Yeah, if you have more questions on all of that, go for it.
I think I understand it pretty well. What we're looking at in the top left corner is the likelihood that synth predicted a 1% price change at any particular moment throughout the day. And this is incredibly important for estimating liquidation. So should you make a put or a call correct, and how much leverage and how much liquidity you should use for that trade. So this is directly valuable to traders.
Exactly, and this is valuable across like so many different aspects of crypto trading. Those three use cases are just kind of ones that we've thought of and spun up, and they're in kind of very different areas of crypto. But there's so many more out there, and because what we've built is this like super versatile data layer where everything's in the form of like simulated paths, we're not tied down to any one use case. We've just got a vast number of use cases within crypto trading. And then longer term, we want to expand to a whole load more industries using the same kind of model once we've kind of proven this within crypto trading.
So this could also be used by exchanges, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because they can use this to determine their side of the liquidity provision.
Exactly. I mean, I don't know to the extent to which they will have their own. So the exchanges are typically just facilitating buying and selling between other people. But there will be large hedge funds that will take on very sizable positions who will want to use our models, as they're hopefully better than their kind of in-house models. Throughout the kind of whole spectrum, really, of down to the retail traders who just want an estimate of the probability, up to kind of the hopefully the most advanced hedge funds who we will hopefully outperform, or can demonstrate that we're outperforming, will want to get involved and get access to this data.
It's a good segue of a question here, Sam, as well. Like, what we're looking at here are statistics that showcase that, like, there's certainly a correlation between the observed liquidation probabilities and the one predicted by synth, and there's a variety of different products, and we can see how they can use it with liquidity providers, etc. Are there statistics that we can look at that showcase this performance against other standardized benchmarks in the industry? Like, who else is doing this and publishing numbers that we have available to us?
Yeah, good question. If anyone has got specific benchmarks out there for liquidation probabilities based on their own models, I'd be very interested to compare. I mean, the options trading is one where we would get a direct comparison against the market. We can pit our synth forecasts against the market by building an automated trading system, which we are quite keen to embark upon, and that will give a definitive answer of like, okay, who is genuinely better here? Is it the whole market or is it synth? Can we generally profit from this? And the areas where it's kind of less like profitable from, for instance, these liquidation probabilities, I imagine we'll already be ahead of anyone else's kind of models out there because people won't have put so much effort into refining them if it's not so linked directly to profit.
And this, and we always win.
Sorry, say that again.
I said this is BitTensor and we always win.
Exactly. Indeed. So yeah, we will beat the rest of the options market. We'll plug it in to Deribit, who is soon to be pretty huge. James, who did Deribit just get bought by?
Coinbase.
Coinbase. There we go. Okay, so there's going to be a whole load more volume available on chain for options trading. So we want to be BitTensor's champion, I guess, in the options trading world. Hopefully win on behalf of BitTensor.
I think, yeah, one more thing to say is like something else which is extremely powerful and which is only possible by BitTensor is this idea of like a meta model of the top 10 miners. So, you know, we're taking this meta model of the top 10 miners, and that's what we're using for a lot of this. We're not using just one, you know, the top one miner. And yeah, this is obviously like the extremely powerful thing about BitTensor is you have this wisdom of the crowd, and you can create these meta models which, you know, outperform singular models that someone might be doing, or even like professional firms might be building. So yeah, that's what's like truly exciting here.
I'm actually very interested in that angle because one of the things that's the most difficult to do once you've built this like proper scoring rule and you have your mechanism that's working, making it so that the miners are working in conjunction and there's some diversity amongst them and that's incentivized inside of your scoring is very difficult, and it's a different direction of incentive problem. It's like going back to the original scoring rule that you guys have here on this page, the CRPS. This is individual, right? So it doesn't matter how you perform relative to other miners in the network. You're just judged by yourself for your predictions. What have you guys thought about so far in terms of combining this scoring? So, for instance, a CRPS rule, which is a proper scoring rule, which rewards you for being accurate when others are inaccurate.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Whether you want to try and reward innovation, I think it adds a lot of complexity. I think the first step is just to kind of aim to get everyone producing the best model on their own with no dependence on other people's models. As soon as you kind of deviate from that, there's a lot of opportunities to try and game the system, and the optimum thing to do starts to diverge away from just trying to produce the best model on your own. You start to think, oh, what is this person doing? I need to do something different. I think that kind of skews things initially. Down the line, I think maybe there are things we can do there to kind of encourage innovation and independence between miners. And also there is an interesting question, as James was saying, like, what is the best meta model? If you did have a miner who is just way better than everyone, wouldn't it be better just to use their predictions if we could get enough predictions from them? So that's the kind of next thing we're working on as well. Currently we're limited to 100 paths every hour per validator, but we're going to add in the ability to probe them for many more paths. Because they have a typically a very easy and cheap to run generative model, we can ask for 10,000 paths, 1 million paths. We're just limited by kind of data constraints, storage size, etc. But we have the power, because we have access to all these miners and a huge leaderboard, to say, okay, what is the optimum? Is it just taking the first place miner? Is it taking a mix of the first 10, the first 50. And we did some testing of this. I think we can do a lot more testing, but for now, for our kind of metrics pages, we're using the top 10. So that turned out to be kind of optimum for now. But that optimum will also change over time. If one miner does pull away and discover something that the others haven't, then yeah, you want to skew towards using more of them in the meta model. So we've kind of got the control of that layer. We can continue to optimize that over time.
Yeah, and there's complexity in the simplicity. I'm also very interested in the data set that you're generating here, and if there's a flywheel occurring between the reward scores that you're producing, the data that the miners are generating in terms of these paths, and the ability for them to just very quickly and easily fine-tune their generative models. Like, do you think that the data you're producing from the network itself, and I know this is not your major product because you're selling the signals, but is that data itself valuable for the miners to train on?
So that was actually our original business concept and kind of why it was called synth. It was we wanted to produce just synthetic data, then be used for other people building models, and typically be used for AI agents to train their systems on. So that was kind of the original plan, was just to have these miners creating this huge, vast database of synthetic data that we could then sell out to AI agent teams who needed loads of data for their kind of reinforcement learning training mechanisms. I think since then we realized there's kind of more valuable outlets to it, but yeah, it's still valuable for that, for anyone who wants this huge amount of like accurate synthetic BTC price data, because in reality there's not that much real BTC price data out there. It's only stretched back 10 years or so, and a lot of that was under very different regimes, and so it's pretty useful for people trying to do very intensive modeling to have much more data with the same nuances. Whether it's a very interesting question as to how much the miners could learn from this data. I guess in theory, the worst miners could learn a lot from the data, but maybe the best miners, if they're already encompassing, if they're the one producing all the nuances, have to go back to the real data, find more nuances, embed that in their model. So it does have the ability to kind of allow miners lower down the leaderboard if they wanted to, if they had access to this data, which we can consider how to do that, but then for them to catch up much more quickly to the top miners. So yeah, as you said, it should be like a flywheel effect, right? It's producing so much data, you can look at what the best miners are doing and not so much imitate, but train on models on that data, and you get progressively more and more good data, which gets progressively better and better. So yeah, that is a pretty promising situation.
Cool.
James?
Yeah, so we have three kind of approaches to what we're calling like revenue generation, commercialization. So we've been speaking so we have this B2B angle. We can sell access to the data, we built an API. That can be interesting for data marketplaces, funds, like hedge funds, exchanges. We've also started to build out these like dashboards, which like are basically tooling pages, which can be integrated to an exchange, or like they could use specific parts of that tooling page, like liquidation probabilities, and like put that within like their trading UI. And we've also been speaking to people about integrating the data into an LLM. So if you go to ChatGPT and you say, what is the price of Bitcoin, or what's the probability the price of Bitcoin will be over 110,000 tomorrow, it won't be able to give you an answer. But if they integrate synth, then they will. So we've also been speaking to a few companies that are building out LLMs, and they're looking at what chat interfaces and seeing what that could look like. We've started to play around with like some ideas for consumer products. We had this idea for a synth Chrome extension. Essentially, we can overlay the price paths using a Chrome extension on any exchange window you open. So you could open up Binance, you could open up the synth Chrome extension. You can get synth paths overlaid. Could be quite fun. And we've also been building out like internal products like an internal LLM that we've been using to query synth data as well. We are looking at this like business to AI vertical, which we find really interesting. Whether that's integrations into different types of agents, or whether that's training data, back testing data. These are all things that we're pretty close to having a good idea on how they will work, and the kind of teams and businesses that are like looking for this data right now. So it's super exciting. And Sam will maybe talk a little bit at the end about like this grand vision for creating these world models, which is like our end goal for AGI decision making. But we'll get into that in a bit. But if we skip to the next slide, like the progress so far, so we only really kicked off the commercial strategy, say like 4 or 5 weeks ago, when we really felt confident in the quality of the data. One partner we've been speaking with and working with to integrate synth into is Chainrisk. Chainrisk essentially is a risk manager for economic security. So they work with lots of lending protocols, and they advise them on essentially economic security, which means looking at like times of like extreme volatility where there might be liquidations. They would advise on how much collateral lending protocols would need to have. They currently secure around 5 billion in digital assets in their first year, so that's a really exciting partnership. We've been working with lots of smaller agent builders. So one team we've been speaking with is called Giza. They have a stablecoin agent, and they're building out multiple other agents. They currently do tens of thousands of transactions via non-custodial agents using an off-chain ML model. And I think they currently have around $2 million under management, and they've been working with lots of similar teams, which are integrating via the Synth API. And we've recently started focusing a lot more on trading agents than on LP agents. Mode, we actually integrate Synth into their AI terminal. So Mode users, I think around 400 users have used the AI terminal. To get access to that AI terminal, they have to stake the Mode token. And the Synth data is being queried daily from there. We've also recently started the relationship with New Data. This is one of the largest like alt data marketplaces, and we're looking to do a series of seminars with them to start to educate people in traditional finance about the power of synthetic data as we start to open up to more assets. So if you go to the next slide. The roadmap.
Here, James.
Sorry?
Back. Before we go there, why don't we have like James as one of these, just trading, being a degen, using the Synth network? Couldn't that just be one of the squares here?
For sure, but we're looking for like pretty significant distribution. We will build out these products, like the Chrome extension could be something for retail traders to use. But what we found is that it's fairly hard for retail traders to grasp like how to trade in a probabilistic way. And we found a lot more success with more like advanced traders. So it's something that firstly needs a lot of education to get retail traders excited. And secondly, we see that there's a good potential for like much wider distribution going direct to these larger organizations and working with them.
But if I was a degen that watched this presentation and understood the significance and the importance of the probabilistic method that you guys are showcasing here, I could go to this network and use these signals as a synth holder.
Yeah. So right now you can go onto synthdata.co and you can get the predicted paths. you can also see like the various dashboards we've created. And yeah, like we're happy to chat to people for API access. But yeah, we're really looking to give API access to like larger organizations.
And you'll have a
The-
terminal. This is coming down the pipe, an actual LLM terminal that you can communicate with.
Yeah.
LLM terminal is, yeah, I'm pretty excited about that. We've built it, and we are refining it currently. It works pretty well, actually. It's kind of remarkable what it can do, and it's only going to get better. I think there's a big jump up from having it plugged into ChatGPT 4.0 to now plugging it into ChatGPT 0.3 and 0.4. So I've got access to that, the one that's plugged into 0.4. And it's really impressive how well it can process my kind of queries to questions and requests, turn those into Python queries, and then apply those queries to the underlying database and return graphs and suggestions. So I do one day want to get that out there to the public. We just need to ensure that the cost is right regarding API calls and that it works sufficiently well. Because I think the first LLM we built, had we released it to the public with the 4.0 plugin, I think it would just cause kind of quite a lot of anger because it worked 80% of the time, but people seem to not like the 20% of the time when things don't work. So I am very keen to get that out there one day soon.
Is this the prediction for tomorrow, and what is it telling us to do?
I believe that should be, is that the live predictions on there? If that's the website, then yes. I think that's the next 12 hours. So we've restricted that to just showing 12 hours to prevent miners being able to kind of copy entire sets of paths. As you can see, the kind of period overnight there is still relatively flat, but kind of lower volatilities before the volatility kind of explodes again tomorrow. And you can see those black swan events that we're talking about being predicted in a couple of the paths to kind of cover their bases that the price may go above 108,000 on that top path. And this is just for one of the miners, so it becomes really powerful for answering questions when you combine top 10. So if you were to go on any of those dashboards, for instance, if you click at that dashboard link at the top, and I think maybe on the see the volatility page, the volatility insights page, I haven't talked much about that. So wow, okay, the volatility has really skyrocketed. As I was saying before, it was down in the doldrums. It was around like, ooh, yeah. So the top miners are predicting kind of madness for tomorrow, which is interesting. Again, lower night and then chaos today in the very high region. I think that's off the back of what has been happening over the last few hours. That is interesting. That is the highest I've seen it, but that is kind of, there's like our predictions from yesterday kind of lined up pretty well without too much happening. And then if we go down to if you scroll further down, we'll be able to see that was from yesterday, the predictions. And these are percentiles, so you can kind of see how extreme today's price growth was. That like second region is the region from like 5% occurrence, so it's well into the region of like kind of maybe 2% occurrence of price movement, which makes sense. It's been a fantastic day in the market, one that we haven't seen the likes of for quite a long time. So now we can see what it's predicting off the back of that tomorrow. So the kind of moment of truth is how ridiculous the next graph might look. If we go down to the bottom of the page, oh, okay, it looks good. There is the predicted percentiles for tomorrow's price movement. So that kind of threshold between dark green into light green, where that occurs, is kind of the 5% chance. So we're looking, according to this, at around 5% chance of it being up above 105k tomorrow, or going back down, retracing steps below 100k. Looks like about maybe 10-15% chance of that happening. So yes, if you have a look at those other dashboards, if you go on back on the dashboard part, and we can have a look at live at the liquidity provisions, liquidity providers page. Anyway, all this is out there for people to scroll through. This is for what I was talking about people wanting to put in concentrated liquidity positions. It's out there at the moment, and we're keen to just build up more and more of these tools for the public to use. But the real point at which we start getting kind of mass distribution is when we partner with the likes of Binance, so that whenever you go on and place a leveraged trade, it pops up with the synth or bit tensor, however you want to label it, powered forecast for your liquidation probability. And you can see it for your whole portfolio. So I think sorry.
It just updated in real time. I don't know if people on the screen saw that.
Yeah. So this is running in real time. So this is plugging into the most recent set of predicted paths, and then as the price changes as well, making use of the current price. I think every 15 seconds or so. So yeah, we're pretty excited about these tools, and we want more people to look at these pages and really kind of review what we're doing. Here's the options prices. So hopefully these are a good fit.
One interesting thing on options pricing as well is, so you can see that like synth can give call up, like synth can price options the full way along the curve, right? And Deribit's actually fairly limited on that. Yeah, if you are looking to price like options in a more custom way, synth can give you the answer for that much better than something like Deribit potentially could, which, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it can produce like prices for any expiry time. So hopefully it's going to be a move to kind of more fluid, shorter-term expiries that are going to be more exciting. Any strike prices, any kind of combination of options. And then I think what James is going to go into is the roadmap where eventually we'll have like correlated paths as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the roadmap. So yeah, Q1 complete. Super happy with that. We've achieved this improvement on like the core benchmark. So now we started to essentially pass the data around and get feedback and start to commercialize it. Q2 we've added ETH. So we haven't actually announced this officially until now, this moment. So ETH has been added, and predictions will come for ETH. We'll have them like live within the dashboards in the next few days. But that's happened already. So
just to clarify, for the ETH predictions, it's going to start from asking the miners. We've got to give the miners a bit of notice. So this can be the notice to the miners to adapt your models. Or towards the end of next week, we'll get the validators to start turning on the requests that involve ETH. So the miners out there, here's some advance notice, and we'll do an announcement in Discord after this. But we're going to require ETH predictions as well going forward. On that topic, we want the miners to kind of keep working essentially. Like potentially that we don't want the miners to be kind of resting on their laurels. If they've made good models, which they've done to this point, maybe they are starting to relax while just kind of keeping in rewards. We want them to be continually working. So next we're going to accelerate now and say, okay, produce models for other assets. After that, produce models that have the correlations correct between assets. So in a single path, I want the Bitcoin price and the Ethereum price, one path. And that's where the modeling starts to get kind of really interesting, how you embed correlations along with volatility together. So all that's coming out the line.
Yep. Also looking at Tau, potentially, to integrate. So go full circle, and use BitTensor to predict Tau. We will be adding in commodities. Commodities are easier to add in. So Bitcoin is actually one of the best assets to model because it's a 24/7 market. So that makes the scoring mechanism, like this continuous rank probability scoring, work really, really well. Gold and silver have fairly, the markets are open most hours of the day. Things close on like Saturday, and sometime Saturday, close on Sunday. Equities trade within like much shorter time periods, so they're harder to model. So we'll add those probably after commodities. we might look at individual stocks, or we might just ask miners to be modeling the SPX, so the index, S&P 500 index. That's coming next, and we've already started to have some inbound requests for individual stocks, so we'll kind of go with wherever there is demand from like these more traditional financial institutions. What do they want, and essentially what will they pay for. Q3, Q4 we'll look to expand into new verticals, subnets, who knows. We're pretty excited about using synthetic data for energy pricing, weather, traffic, health, and 2026 will be about powering our AGI overlords with probabilistic models for all of these areas that they'll probably be running for us.
Onwards.
So that's kind of the vision. The end goal is that Synth becomes this forecasting engine for AI and LLMs across all industries that require probabilistic data.
Is this what you're building into that LLM that we saw on the website a second ago on the front page? You guys are showcasing what it would look like for an LLM to have access to predictive statistics.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the dream is then for all the major LLMs out there to have access to synth data. So for us to do deals with all the big players, so that they can automatically recreate that process of being able to query this data and provide answers on any probabilistic questions to their users. And the dream is to not just limit that to crypto asset forecasts, but be the people that have a whole range of models in weather, in health, sports, all of finance, as you mentioned, energy, etc. This Monte Carlo structure that we built kind of lends itself so well to any time series forecasting that the plan is to get miners to build models for all of those different areas and hopefully get on a lot of kind of industry experts from those areas and sufficiently incentivize them to be building models on synth so that we are the data layer for AIs in the future, whether it's LLMs or whether it's kind of fully autonomous AIs that are scheming out in cyberspace or robots out in the world that need world models. If you're a robot and you don't know whether to you need an umbrella or not today, how are you going to answer that question with the current kind of LLM setup? You can plug into a weather forecast out there already, but it doesn't really produce the correct kind of probabilistic path-based answers that you as a robot would like to be able to best answer your questions. So that is the grand vision of synth.
And your CRPS scoring can work for binary outcomes as well, if the models are just predicting zeros and ones, I suppose.
Exactly, yeah. So one of the things we're kind of tempted to do soon is potentially sunlight, or is it sunny? Is it not at any given time? So for that you just have the binary outcome of for this minute it was sunny, this next minute it wasn't sunny. So the scoring mechanism or some slight adaptation of the scoring mechanism can work well for that.
So you could potentially just create time series out of any type of question that you wanted by querying the miners. So you could say, okay, give me a prediction on whether or not the Pope has been elected in the next 24 hours. And they predict 0, then 0.5, then 1 over the 24 hours, indicating they think that in that path they believe the Pope was elected.
For sure. That's can kind of be a time series essentially. And there are other areas that I would like to try and figure out ways to expand to that are not exactly time series, but still benefit from like path-based models. For instance, election predictions, all the models people had of the election results across the various states. There are a lot of kind of Monte Carlo models going into that. that generate these distributions of, okay, what is the probability of these certain distributions of states going each way. Our scoring system can be fairly easily adapted, I think, to be able to handle those kind of things as well. Any kind
And
of,
how,
yeah.
and how does that work from the miner side? When it comes to Bitcoin prediction, it's obviously clear that they need to focus on predicting the Bitcoin price by collecting data. If you just ask a random question about a time series they don't know about beforehand, are you expecting the miners to develop sort of theory of everything type models that given any prompt, what's the likely number of car crashes that will happen in this neighborhood of London in the next 24 hours? That's something that these models should be able to produce, a time series
that might be. I think my preference, at least initially, would be to stick with kind of more well-defined modeling tasks that have got long-term historical data and have kind of frequent updates. So maybe the election example wasn't the best example because it's just a kind of one-off event. So how do you really judge which miners did well and which didn't? Maybe you can use that to model polling statistics instead over time. But ideally, it was in like a specific industry where we could gain experts in from that industry and be asking kind of distinct questions that could still have many judgments over time, then that could work. But yeah, kind of the idea of just standalone answer everything questions is probably, I think there's some other subnets trying to do that. I think probably not our focus yet.
On the prize of becoming the ultimate forecasting engine, and the AIs will be very dangerous at that point. Should we go to the next slide? Indeed.
Best to get in there with them now. It's kind of a Pascal's wager situation. Maybe not dangerous is the right word, but best to help out the AIs at this stage. How, as a kind of question for you, I mean, we're at this turning point now where we're about to commercialize and we've got all these avenues to make money and get money in, be it through B2C, B2B, AI. What's the best way for us to back to BitTensor with that money? How do we create, like, what is your desire for creating a kind of flywheel ecosystem or kind of giving back that money? I mean, there are the kind of obvious options of purchasing alpha tokens with the earnings, but are there kind of less obvious options out there that you can think of, or you've been suggesting subnets for how to kind of ensure we're self-sufficient?
I think that the subnets that turn their miners and their holders into guerrilla miners of other protocols inside and outside of BitTensor, the subnets that manage to militantly monetize their commodities will be successful. So, if that means James is degen trading off synth signals and saying, I'm going to pull all of these profits and put this back into the network, it doesn't need to be formal. It doesn't need to be on chain. That's just an incredible showcase of the digital commodity, right? To go out and just use it. And I'd like to see more and more of that across the ecosystem, from subnets that just use their commodities to mine other protocols, to mine their own, to mine subnets within BitTensor, to do what TauHash is doing. I think that we can get Joseph on stage if he really wants to talk about this, because he's a promoter of this idea. I think TauHash is going to totally change the way in which BitTensor subnets are monetized, because we're beginning to see real pressure from, we can build subnets that are directly 100% monetizable. And so the revenue is equivalent to the emission. And TauHash is probably going to be one of the first subnets to get to that point. Then there are subnets like what you guys have, where the cost is hard to really quantify. The upside on the digital commodity that you're producing is potentially endless. Like if you're able to extract, percentage points of better accuracy in predicting the price of Bitcoin or the S&P 500,
the sky's the limit on what the multiple is there for the digital commodity that you're producing. And so a lot of what's happening for something like you guys is you just have to prove that there's this multiple exists, right? So do you really need to go and monetize it right now, or do you need to focus on actually just proving to everyone that this thing has incredible value? If you guys get to that point where it's true, going out and just monetizing and using the network yourself, I think is a great way to just lead the field of people, and also to get your community to go out and use the digital commodity themselves, and not just be the only people involved in that process. So it's gonna be very interesting to see how that plays out. But I Joseph probably has his opinion on that, and that's all I would say is a tip of my mind.
I really don't have much to add beyond what Const just mentioned, which I think was very beautifully articulate. One additional maybe paraphrase or interpretation of that would be just looking at Bitcoin. It started off as a very abstract incentive mechanism for a cryptographic hash, and the people who deeply understood what that would produce, which is digital scarcity and a representation of value for a durable currency that would be unhackable and decentralized and permissionless, ultimately ended up creating this $2 trillion asset that we all kind of admire, and it's what inspired BitTensor, right? What I actually have tried to sort of say more and more of, and I think this applies to every subnet, is they're all sort of mini Bitcoins, right? And they're sort of abstract mini Bitcoins in that the digital commodity, as Const was saying, is a sort of representation of some very useful computation that increasingly improves as you have more miner competition. But the way you really look at the alpha token, and this is where things get more nuanced, but I think they start to really mirror how Bitcoin evolved. The alpha token for each subnet that continuously improves more of a valuable, useful commodity in the world is the representation of that commodity. And so it is quite literally both a medium of exchange and a store of value, but it's really up to the subnet teams to manifest how strongly store of value or medium of exchange is sort of amplified in the world. And so as we all know, Bitcoin started off with a mission to be a medium of exchange, digital cash, e-cash, a payment system. What it ultimately ended up evolving towards, because of financialization and monetary policy, is a store of value, right? A gold competitor. But Satoshi's original vision was really used as a payment system. I think for alpha tokens to really succeed and be massively impactful in the world for humanity is to be a gating mechanism for the commodity, to be a payment mechanism for the commodity that they are the representation of. And I think this is true for Tau Hash. I think this is true for 51 Celium. It can be true for Synth. It can be true for every subnet. And you have to start to think about everything Const mentioned on using the value of the commodity, monetizing into the world, investing back in the alpha, but thinking about the alpha as both a medium of exchange and a store of value for the representation of the commodity. And I'll just leave it at that. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that fits well with the synth grand vision. If we have synth alpha token potentially as the currency of these AIs plugging into our data layer, if they have to make a payment in real time to access the data layer, that makes the super valuable as this medium of purchasing knowledge and data and purchasing these simulated paths across all industries. So that AIs can in future make a decision themselves of thinking, oh, okay, is it worth me paying one alpha token for these Monte Carlo paths for sunlight tomorrow or for the Bitcoin price, whatever it might be? And if so, they can pay that in real time potentially and obtain data from a synth data layer. This kind of fits in with that idea and could work for the grand vision.
Absolutely. I also think that you shouldn't shy away from using the network yourselves. There's nobody who understands its value better than you, right? There's no one that knows how cool BitTensor is in the world than me. That can think of a billion things to build. It's the same thing with what you guys have created here. And sometimes it's important to build for yourselves, right? I think that it's incredibly dangerous that we have somebody like Fish in BitTensor that has Cilium at his disposal to mine all of the subnets on BitTensor. But it's also incredibly brilliant that he built the tools that he needed to do that at the cheapest price. You guys have built an amazing tool that you can use at your disposal. I really want to see from teams like just get excited about, hey, well, great, well, if no one else is going to use this, I'm going to use this, and then the FOMO is created, right? But also like all of the partnerships that you guys, if you're a step ahead of that and you're working with teams like from Binance and Deribit and DYDX to pump these signals out to them, that's fantastic and really exciting. And I think that you should just be clear about right now, honestly, it's about getting customers, it's getting people that are interested to understand the vision. But ultimately, I don't think that it is what would just drive the initial or the early price for the subnet token. And some will disagree. That's my take. Very cool, guys.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic presentation and a conversation with you guys. Great results, and it was. I had Synth on the top of my deck for doing novelty search, and I went and read your guys' deck and your research paper, and it's all been really well put together and incredibly. I think that you've disseminated some information into our ecosystem, which shouldn't be lost, the significance of it, like the scoring rule. This was like the answer to, is it called the proper scoring rule? Correct, Sam?
Yeah.
And this was the problem that a lot of predictive subnets had come across for a long period of time. That they didn't know the underlying game theory of the reward function that was forcing people to make like high confidence predictions about uncertain events that would get them a high score and maximize the reward in their subnets, but actually turned out to just be creating like martingale style strategies on the system, right? I'll just make a whole bunch of, every time I make an overconfident prediction that's wrong, I'll make another even more confident prediction that's wrong. And it's like a high dimensional version of a martingale, which you saw in a number of prediction subnets. And you guys came in and basically figured out that, well, there's a way around this, which is the proper scoring rule. And it's a deep statistical field that you like. This is not the only proper scoring rule that you could possibly use. And anyways, it's very interesting to get into the nitty gritty and beautiful mathematics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having us. Super excited. Keep building.
Brilliant.
All right. Ciao, everyone. Thanks for coming. Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.